Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 10th of October 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comments. Coming up in the show, UK Trading Standards Authority calls changes to PS4 pre-orders illegal, Square-Enix announces new crowdfunding effort, and Warface in a little bit of hot water over the design of the female soldiers. All this and the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Those who have pre-ordered a PlayStation 4 through simplygames.co.uk, one of the larger UK gaming retailers, have reported that they have been contacted telling them that they must change to a higher priced bundle in order to keep their pre-order valid. They were instructed that they would now need to buy a bundle between £415 and £470 in order to actually guarantee their unit for release day. The director of the company, Neil Musprat, spoke to CVG magazine and stated that the pre-order policy would remain in place. He also claimed that no one was really upset about it, saying that it's just commentators who have stirred it up and that most companies were happy with the offer. Well, unfortunately for him, it would seem that the UK Trading Standards Authority, the watchdog that oversees such things, strongly disagrees, claiming that the action is in fact illegal and that swift injunctive action is required by the courts in order to prevent this from happening. When asked as to the legalities, they said that you can have a contract where the price agreed is the price at the time of delivery, such as a new car on a long waiting list. Here, the seller cannot control the product price months down the line. However, this would appear to be profiteering. The seller is raising the price, hoping that people either drop out or pay more, and if they drop out, they can resell it at a higher price to another customer. They went on to say it is illegal and up to the Home Authority to intervene if the seller is UK-based. Now, I've got to say that usually on this show, I tend to go out of my way not to attack people. Yeah, I prefer to attack ideas. I don't really like to engage in ad hominem, but in this case, I'll make an exception. This guy's an asshole. As simple as that. Neil Musprat is out of his mind if he thinks we will actually believe that. Really? You think that all customers are happy about it? They are blatantly not happy about it. As the Trading Standards Authority very clearly said, there is no way out of this for the consumer. If they drop out, Simply Games loses nothing. They can simply sell that console to somebody else with a bundle and demand more money for it. Now, the practice of selling next-gen consoles with bundles is a popular one. Outside of the initial launch, when stocks are pretty low, usually you'll find that stores create bundles and only sell it that way. And I think it was the 360 launch, I was actually working at Game, we had that. So if you pre-ordered the console soulless, you could have it on its own, yeah? But if you didn't, and then you tried to buy one a little bit later on when stocks were very low, you would only be able to buy it as part of a bundle. There was no other way around it, simply because the store wanted to make more money, and they were well in their rights to actually do that. In this case, though, you are saying, oh, your pre-order, that wasn't valid. And you're not going to pre-order the console in multiple places. It costs an awful lot of money. You don't want to do that. You relied on Simply Games to give you what they offered you. And they're not doing that. More to the point, a lot of these bundles are actually unofficial. Yeah? They're ridiculous. The dual charging cable for the PlayStation 4, which is being offered as one of these bundles from Simply Games, is not an official piece of hardware. It's most likely just a third-party USB cable that they're making a little bit of extra margin from. Now, it's been a while since I've done anything legal related, but if I were to break it down to the very simplest concept as to whether or not this is illegal would come down to if the pre-order stands as an offer or an invitation to treat. If it stands as an offer, it is very much legally binding. If it stands as an invitation to treat, then while it's a scummy thing to do, it's not illegal. An invitation to treat is not legally binding for the most part. You are inviting a further offer. And as a direct result, you're not bound by it under contract law in the UK. It's really hard to know as to what would be the case. If money was taken, then it's most assuredly an offer at that point, but if there has been no consideration given as of yet, that being a form of compensation of some description, which is usually money changing hands, then perhaps it could be treated in a way that is not legally binding. But ultimately, there's no real doubt that this is an incredibly scummy thing to do, and unfortunately, unless there is some legal consequence, Simply Games will certainly get away with it, because there is a higher demand for this product than there is stock. So if someone does say, you know what, I don't want to pick this up anymore because I don't like your deal, they can sell it to someone else in a heartbeat, and they're not going to even bat an eyelid. I hope the consequences for this are are both legal and put a massive dent in their reputation, because it simply is profiteering. I can't even argue with it. The freedom of the retailer to do this is very, very limited because they made a specific promise, and the only person that gets screwed here is the consumer. It's pretty shocking behavior, quite frankly, from Simply Games, and I would hope that people bear that in mind strongly when they consider doing business with them again. Square-Enix has announced a partnership with Indiegogo to create The Collective, which they bill as Help Make Something Awesome. It's essentially a crowdfunding effort which is curated through Square-Enix using the Indiegogo platform, which will allow for ideas and pitches to be given, and then the actual viability of the pitch will be checked by Square-Enix, and the ones that they deem viable and popular will be put onto the service to be crowdfunded by the community, and then Square-Enix will be responsible for helping those developers bring the project to market. One of the more interesting parts of this announcement was the fact that it would be possible for developers to get a hold of old IDOS IP from the Square-Enix back catalog after their acquisition. The announcement, as you might imagine, has been met with mixed opinions. And I'm going to be honest, I have a mixed opinion on this as well, so let's have a look at both sides of it. So, to start with, the obvious negative. Square Enix, a large publisher, a large international publisher, is asking for your money to make games. They wish to take the risk out of the game development process by putting that risk on you instead of on them. They do not want to fund this stuff. They would like you to fund it, and then they, of course, will be the guys who are making the profit on top of that. That is a very large negative to this. The idea of major publishers resorting to crowdfunding, to me, seems pretty damn ludicrous. Isn't the point of crowdfunding kind of a last resort, after we've exhausted the notion of being able to go to a traditional publisher to make whatever it is that we're trying to make? Is it not a place where you go after saying, this is not going to be made any other way? Square Enix might not be doing amazingly well right now, but they are most assuredly in the position where they could make these games happen without community support. And indeed, if they wanted to create a platform like this, they didn't have to go down the crowdfunding route. They could just go down a crowdsourced information route instead. They could use some kind of platform as market research, which is also what this platform actually is. It just happens to have the added benefit of them having a bunch of money thrown at the project so they don't have to do the money throwing. Bear in mind, of course, that when you give money to a project like this, you are most assuredly not an investor. So, with the publisher model, the publisher wins here. They get free money, and aside from that, the obligations simply come down to the game actually being released. But there comes in the flip side of the argument. There comes in the idea that this perhaps might be good in some way. One of the biggest problems we currently have with the crowdfunded model is that there is nothing keeping an eye on the people taking the money. We have to do our own research, and caveat emptor, very much the case when it comes to crowdfunding. Very difficult to enforce the law when it comes to that kind of stuff, especially considering how it's worded. You are not guaranteed the product, and that can be a real problem. You are not an investor. You don't have any real legal protection when a product goes tits up. If that company ends up in bankruptcy, you are most likely going to end up being an unsecured creditor who is basically last in line to get some money back from the liquidation of the assets, assuming there are any assets to liquidate. It's very easy to burn through that money on salaries alone, and then when nothing happens and people start asking for the money back, there's no money to give back. We're also talking about the notion that these organizations simply might not be skilled enough to deliver a quality product. So if you have Square Enix looking over the shoulder and actually curating these ideas and making sure, doing the due diligence essentially, you actually could get a very positive outcome there. You could end up in a situation where the necessary support is required, and thankfully the support is actually there this time, whereas it wouldn't be if it were just a mere crowdfunding effort without any oversight. I feel that oversight is hugely beneficial. I think that you could get some really good products out of this. How much support would Square Enix really be willing to provide, though, I suppose is the question. They have talked about their expertise about bringing games to market. Okay, does that mean you'll provide QA? Will you provide technical assistance? I have to wonder how much support you would be willing to provide there. If they run out of money, will you fork over the rest to make sure the game actually finishes? These are the kind of guarantees that I want to see. If they're willing to provide all of those guarantees and then some, it still smells wrong. Don't get me wrong, the crowdfunded model has been compared at many junctures to pre-ordering and just throwing money at stuff that doesn't exist yet, but it was only acceptable on the basis that there was no way this game was getting made any other way. With a publisher already on board with the idea, you've got to say, well, actually, it could be made another way. The traditional model, that could work. How much benefit does Square-Enix get out of this? What kind of take would they be getting out of it? I don't mind great games being made. What I do mind is the crowdfunded model being co-opted to exploit consumers directly. I don't go into a Kickstarter effort knowing that I'm going to get a product at the end. I certainly hope that I would get it because that's what I'm giving them the money to do, but I'm going to have to trust them. In that case, though, they are small developers with a dream. It's easier to get behind that. It's not as easy to get behind a large international publisher saying, oh, give us some money and we'll make sure this idea happens. I'm very conflicted about this. It could result in some great stuff. It could eliminate one of the biggest problems with crowdfunding, that idea of oversight and due diligence. However, you are still talking about Square Enix asking for your money for products that don't exist yet and reducing their overall risk at the cost of your overall risk. But I wonder just how much risk there really is when it comes down to this kind of program for the consumer. If I throw $50 at this game and Square Enix is looking over the shoulder of the devs to make sure it comes out, is that okay? Potentially, yes. That basically just turns it into a pre-order, which obviously is bad in the first place, but at least we're probably going to get the game. And if we don't, the consequences for Square Enix would be most dire. I have to wonder if this is potentially more risky for Square Enix than they're letting on there. So I don't have a conclusion. I don't. I see the good and the bad here. It still smells wrong to me. It still smells like the kind of thing a trad publisher should not be doing. But I can see good things coming out of it. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. Perhaps some of those questions will be answered at GDC next, which will be on the 5th to the 7th of November. And finally, Crytek has got itself in a little bit of hot water over the design of Warface's female soldiers, which came into play after community feedback. They actually went directly to their player base and asked exactly what kind of designs the player base would like, and as a direct result, we have a sniper with something of an open top with cleavage exposed, and the rifleman, who is a little bit more reasonable, but certainly far less armored than the male version. A little bit less practical, one would have to say. The rifleman's female model seems to be lacking a lot of the armor and utility pouches that the male's has, and instead of wearing a helmet, is wearing what appears to be a green beret of some description. Aside from that, she seems to be rather reasonable, but as accurately described in a Wired article, we'd imagine the sniper might get a little bit of nettle rash from lying down with half of her chest exposed. Crytek spoke on the subject of the female skins and indicated that they're a good example of how culturally the different regions approach the same game in different ways. The skins that we are showing right now, they said, are the skins that basically came out of our Russian region. They're not what our players at first requested. They tended to be considerably more extreme than what we ended up shipping with. Crytek went on to say that it's our job to maintain that Warface has an authenticity to it and actually makes sense. They also stated that they would be doing a different character model set for the Chinese region, and I would imagine perhaps a different set again for its Western release. It goes beyond cosmetics, though. Crytek also described the idea that weapon recoil is something that different regions like in different ways. According to their research, Russian players like strong weapon recoil in general, Asian regions don't like much at all, and Europe and North America kind of sandwiched in the middle of that, and they are willing to actually tweak that balance in order to create an experience that they believe will be accepted within that particular region. That's really odd, isn't it? And we're talking about not just changes cosmetically, but also in terms of game mechanics. I've never considered the idea that perhaps weapon recoil and just general features and balance like that can be treated differently in different regions. So strange. But the point of this article, I suppose, was to have a look at cultural relativism, and the article writer in question seems to be of the belief that the idea is inherently problematic. term that is certainly loaded, unfortunately, these days. Needless to say, the term misogynistic came up in the article in the form of a question by the interviewer. Are you tempted to say, she asked, that's not right, we're going to do it our way, and either you get on board with this or you take your misogynistic views elsewhere? And of course, Crytek responded in a fairly cagey manner, as you might imagine. The full article is definitely worth a read, and there's, of course, in the description below this video. But it would, of course, be nice if we could stop pretending that wanting attractive female characters in a game that is played primarily by males is somehow misogynistic. Maybe I just have an old definition, you know, the sensible one, where misogyny actually indicated that you thought less of women or that you actively hated them. I suppose you could argue that you think less of women if you decide that you want them in less clothes. I mean, that's a very easy way of looking at it. The alternate view, which is a tad silly, but regardless, so is a lot of this discussion, is the notion that apparently women can do more with less clothes and have the same amount of armor value, which is a little bit silly. Anyway, besides that point, I think it really comes down to the very simple idea that this game is played primarily by teenage boys. It is a free-to-play shooter. I wouldn't call it a modern military shooter because it's actually set in the future, but it's a free-to-play sci-fi shooter. It's going to be played by primarily teenage boys, primarily Russian teenage boys. And of course, as a direct result, the hormone-charged bastards are looking to get attractive female characters in the game. The strange thing here is that we have the opposite scenario from what we saw in Dragon's Crown, where the argument would be made that you don't want to compromise your creative vision. In this case, they deliberately compromised their creative vision, but they compromised with people that basically wanted women soldiers running around in bikinis, which is very silly indeed, and said, you know, here, okay, here's a little bit more of a sexy female character, but not completely impractical. And it's certainly not completely impractical. Maybe it's just because I have a penis, but I'm afraid I am not massively offended by the notion of a sniper with a bit of cleavage showing or a rifleman without 200 pounds of gear on her. It's a video game, it doesn't really matter that much. Admittedly, I also feel that other games did a significantly better job of actually showing female soldiers. If you look at the Imperial Guardswoman, in fact, in Warhammer Space Marine, there's an example of practical armor and a practical set of sensibilities. Ultimately, this comes down to a very simple concept. If you ask a bunch of 13-year-old boys how they would like females to look, then the feedback is going to be very predictable. I would imagine it's the other way around as well. If you asked a bunch of 13-year-old females what they would like the male characters to look like in something, then yes, it's going to come back again in a fairly similar way, because they're teenagers. This is not necessarily indicative of inherent deep-rooted misogyny within the gaming scene, as much as it tells us the very simple, well-known fact that kids in puberty are pretty damn stupid. I think you will find that older male gamers' desires when it comes to the way that women are portrayed are significantly more nuanced, and yes, a lot of gamers really do want better female characters in games. They want better characters in general, but we want less absurdity when it comes to dealing with that kind of thing. But the lesson to learn here is don't ask a bunch of 13-year-old boys how you should design your female soldiers. I feel that Crytek could have perhaps, quote, taken a stand, but that indicates that you believe that this is a major issue worth taking a stand on. I'm glad that they do not have female soldiers running around in bikinis, because that's dumb, and I'm not really a big fan of dumb art design when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I feel perhaps the conclusion to bring is that we shouldn't be so accusatory and be so willing to point fingers at developers and just scream the word misogyny from the rooftops, because it's an intellectually dishonest accusation for the most part, and this is simply an example of a company taking customer feedback, which we consistently tell them they should be doing, and then coming up with a compromise that didn't offend everybody. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day. Final Fantasy has been remixed perhaps more than any game in the history of ever. I don't think there's a question about that one. And this one comes from Final Fantasy VI. There are plenty of really good Final Fantasy remixes in pretty much all genres. In this case, something a little bit more relaxed, with a little bit of trumpet in there for good measure. It's called Anthem of Exile, and it is remixed by JJT, and this is an interpretation of Edgar and Sabin's theme. I think you'll like it an awful lot. So sit back, relax with a small glass of cognac, and enjoy the sounds of Anthem of Exile. I'll see you next time.